This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 23 of season 3 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, June 4th, 1910, and I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford that week. The week starts with the paragraph entitled Monthly Meeting. The regular monthly meeting of the Ladies' Missionary Society of the Congregational Church met at the parsonage with Mrs. Wallace, who was the pastor's wife, on Thursday afternoon of last week. The subject for the afternoon was a continuation of the winter study, quote, The Gospel in Latin Lands, end quote, by Dr. Francis E. Clark and Mrs. Clark, the special subject for the meeting being the Gospel in Spain. At the close of the program, a social hour was enjoyed, the lady of the parsonage having invited quite a few outside members. Miss Loker gave some account of her recent trip to Washington, and a Shakespearean guessing contest was much enjoyed. Refreshments of cake and sherbet were served. The next section is called Memorial Exercises. Friday afternoon, in the schools, appropriate memorial exercises were held. At the Frost School, the pupils in the two upper rooms combined in a program of music and recitations suitable to the spirit of Memorial Day. At the Academy, a patriotic program was held with music and declamations, and Reverend Mr. Wallace addressed the pupils, and Reverend Mr. Bailey gave recollections of the war from personal experiences in his own interesting way. They were the pastors of the Congregational Church on Lincoln Street and the Unitarian Church on the Main Street in Westford Center. Next is called the Union Memorial Service. The Union Memorial Service, which was held at the Union Congregational Church on last Sunday, was a fitting introduction to our special observation of Memorial Day this year. It was a capacity audience that filled the auditorium, and vestries that were thrown into one, but there was a welcome for everyone. The perfect weather made it a pleasure to get out. The national colors were draped over the pulpit arch and the speaker's desk, and in addition to this, a wealth of delicate white spirea with greenery was used. The veterans met at the Cavalry Association building, now the house at 20 Boston Road, and marched to the church escorted by the Sons of Veterans. They occupied seats at the front of the church reserved for them. The musical part of the service, by the United Choirs, blending the devotional and patriotic, was especially well rendered. Welcome, Grand Army Men, and Rest, Spirit, Rest were given by the full chorus. Reverend Benjamin H. Bailey made the prayer, and Louis F. Havermale of the Graniteville Methodist Church gave the invocation and scripture reading. Reverend David Wallace, pastor of the Union Congregational Church, preached a thoughtful and excellent sermon from Psalm 48, verses 12 and 13. With its message to the veterans and to all his hearers, the need of patriotism and courage in the daily warfare of our complicated modern lives. After the service, a luncheon was served by the ladies to the members of the Veteran Association, after which they made the rounds of the cemeteries and decorating the graves of their former comrades. The next section is called the Dedication. The day, which has been prepared for and anticipated for many weeks in our town, has come and gone. Its actual happenings are over and have passed into very interesting local history, but its memories will remain most definitely and lasting. I might mention the description of the dedication is quite lengthy, and I have omitted some of it for this podcast. However, I created a document titled Westford Civil War Monument that collects all the many Wardsman articles about the dedication, as well as the description of the dedication from the 1911 Westford Town Reports. It is available at the Westford Museum office. Back to the Wardsman. It was an old home day, a Memorial Day observance, and a splendid dedication of its new soldiers' monument combined into one. The spirit of the occasion started Friday afternoon with a suitable observance in the schools. Saturday, absent members of many households began to arrive. Scarcely a home was without guests, either of kindred or friends. Many were the graves of loved ones in God's acre, besides the soldier dead that were tenderly garlanded with flowers. At the public buildings, all of the public buildings were trimmed most effectively, the work of Boston Decorating Company, as were also nearly all the private dwellings. Flags and bunting were everywhere. The faces of Washington, Lincoln, and Grant were noted in their setting of red, white, and blue. When Monday morning came, all was in readiness for the dedication, and all arrangements for the day were carried out in a manner most creditable to the committee, who have worked as faithfully and well. Shaded skies may have made some difference in the attendance, but a great gathering came. There were fully 1,000 people present at the ceremonies. They're talking about the triangle where the Civil War monument stands, which is what they were dedicating this year. Shaded skies may have made some difference in the attendance, but a great gathering came. There were fully 1,000 people present at the ceremonies. They came in carriages, autos, barges, electrics, by trains, and on foot. The Nashua Military Band, always a favorite with Westford people, was in attendance during the day and gave a fine concert previous to the dedicatory service, which took place promptly at the appointed time. The Chelmsford veterans were the guests for the Day of Westford Veterans, and this was very suitable as Chelmsford is considered as sort of the mother town of Westford. The men of these two companies, to which the day has been a deeper significance than others, were drawn up about the curbing of the monument, and back of them were the surging crowd of people. After a selection by the band, prayer was offered by Reverend Benjamin H. Bailey, after which Colonel Metcalf, the donor of the monument, the hero of the day, a man who has gone out into the world and done things, a man of achievement, a worthy son of a worthy father, a father in whose memory he makes this gift to the town, stepped forward and, in well-chosen words, presented the monument to the town. Miss Hazel B. Hartford, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. A.W. Hartford, and a granddaughter of Wesley Hawks, president of the Veterans Association, then pulled the cords that loosened the unfolding flags, and the impressive figure of a soldier in bronze on a large granite base stood revealed. The gift was then accepted by Oscar R. Spaulding, chairman of the Selectmen, in most fitting and appropriate words that found hearty echo in the hearts of all who listened. The Weber Quartet of Boston then sang, and the beautiful ceremony of decorating the monument by the veterans with band accompaniment was performed. At about this time, the rain, which had threatened, began to fall, and the crowds scattered to shelter. Many went to the library, and many went to the town hall, especially those holding dinner tickets. At 1:15, when it was time to form the march to the Common, the weather had cleared. Headed by the band and the veterans, the long procession formed and filed to the big tent, which measured 125 by 50 feet. An excellent menu was prepared by a caterer of Lowell, to which full justice was done. Preparations were made for 500 people, and fully that number was cared for. After the repast, Captain Sherman H. Fletcher called to order and presided. Captain Fletcher made an address of welcome, and all that he said was timely and pertinent. He thought it eminently fitting that the tent should be erected and the exercises take place on the Common, where nearby stood the flagstaff, which was erected and dedicated in the stirring times of the early 60s, and on whose cross trees were inscribed the words Liberty and Union. And nearby the building, then the village District No. 1 schoolhouse, which was demolished in the 1960s, but now transformed into a dwelling where the memorable meeting was held, where Colonel Metcalf's father was the first to sign the roll for the enlistment for troops. He then introduced Colonel Edwin D. Metcalf of Auburn, New York, the donor of the monument, who spoke in part as follows. I have been asked several times why, not being a native of this town, I was led to present Westford with a soldier's monument instead of the city of Auburn. He lived in Auburn, New York. When I came here to bury my father, Lieutenant William Metcalf, who died on June 18, 1900, I was met at the railroad station by a delegation of old soldiers. They were strangers to me. They came without any solicitation. They came without previous knowledge on my part, but I was so pleased and so much touched at the spirit of devotion and loyalty of those who had stood shoulder to shoulder during the Civil War that I then and there resolved that I would do something in Westford to the memory of the volunteers. That's the end of the quote from Colonel Metcalf's speech. The next speaker of the day was the Honorable John D. Long, who, while a teacher in Westford Academy, that was 1857 to 1859, formed such friendships and associations with this town that he is always most heartily welcomed here. John Davis Long had a very distinguished career and was much beloved by the residents of Westford. He was governor of Massachusetts from 1880 to 83 and Secretary of the Navy under President McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt. Interestingly, Theodore Roosevelt served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy under Secretary Long prior to the Spanish-American War. The closing address of the day was by the Honorable Charles S. Hamlin of Boston, former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. He used the most of his time in personal reminiscence of his acquaintances with various Westford men during his summers spent with his grandfather close by the spot where he stood. Charles Sumner Hamlin was a Boston lawyer, was twice Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, and was the first chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. He was the son of Edward Sumner Hamlin and grandson of Nathan Sumner Hamlin and Harriet Fletcher, who built and occupied the house at 1 Hildreth Street facing the monument. And that house, of course, is still there. The exercises were brought to a close by singing America by the audience. Next is the Westford Center section. Dr. Orion V. Wells has a new automobile which will greatly facilitate matters in getting over the many miles of road the country practitioner has to travel. Thursday evening, June 9th, Westford Grange will observe its 15th anniversary. The State Master, Charles M. Gardner, and the State Lecturer will be present, and many other invited guests will be present. Next is the About Town section. It is reported that legal papers have been served on the town in a suit for damages caused by the death of Charles W. Reed in falling into an excavation on the curve of the road near the residence of John C. Abbott. The people of Westford regret this sad accident. Reverend Seth Walker, who has been minister of the Advent Church in Lowell, has been transferred to the Advent Church in Worcester. He is an eloquent preacher, and the change is in the nature of promotion. He was present at the dedication of the Soldiers' Monument, as well as Edwin E. Haywood, George Snow, Miss Marion Wright, Gilbert A. Wright, Alonzo B. Falls, all old familiarities in the bygone days of the old Stony Brook School, which Samuel Taylor also attended, the author of this About Town section of the newspaper. C.R.P. Decatur took a leap of 40 days ahead on June 1st and commenced haying. Walter Kimball has his residence at Westford Depot broken into and a sum of money borrowed never to be returned. Matthew Smith is making Brookside look more city-like by enlarging the ground floor space of his store. He claims plenty of room now for yeast cakes to make everything rise that you want, except prices. Mrs. F.W. Bannister has been awarded the contract for carrying the mail under the 3 mail a day contract. Daniel H. Sheehan, I believe that was the contract to carry the mail from the railroad station where it arrived on the train up the hill to the post office, which was in one of the general stores in Westford Center. Daniel H. Sheehan, vinegar, cotton, woolen, and lumber manufacturer, has also large agricultural interests in Georgia and at present is busy harvesting potatoes, having 6 potato diggers, horsepower style, in operation, his smallest patch being 100 acres. At a meeting of the Westford Veterans Association, J. Everett Woods was elected commander. He was a gallant soldier in the Civil War and has been a gallant soldier in civil peace since the war. The next paragraph is called A Veteran. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas E. Taylor of Woodsville, New Hampshire, were at his brother's, Samuel L. Taylor's, over Sunday to attend the special memorial exercises. Mr. Taylor was only 20 when he enlisted from Westford, serving 4 years, and 2 of his brothers were already at the front. It was full as hard for the relatives who remained at home, he says, as for those who were actually in the battles. For the soldiers there was activity. For the mothers and fathers there was anxiety, and the continual fear that the next mail might bring sad reports. Mr. Taylor marched with the veterans at the exercises on Sunday and Monday. He still preserves the comfort bags and other things sent by the Westford women. Next we come to the Ford's Village section. Sunday, June 5th, Loyal Self-Help Lodge, IOOF, that's the Oddfellows Lodge, will hold memorial services in St. Andrew's Mission. All the members are requested to meet at the lodge rooms not later than 9:45 a.m. The members are requested to wear a white tie and white gloves. At the conclusion, a committee will decorate the graves of deceased members at Fairview Cemetery. Miss Eva F. Pine, spelled P-Y-N-E, primary school teacher of Cameron School, will entertain her pupils at her home at Pine Ridge, spelled P-I-N-E, next Saturday. At the regular meeting of the John Edwards Hose Company, held at their rooms on Wednesday evening, Fred Droulet was appointed steward in place of William Hunt, who resigned. Edward T. Hanley, first lieutenant, Francis Lowther, second lieutenant, Joseph Bennett, and Joseph McDonald were appointed call men. The next paragraph is called School Exercises. Memorial Day exercises were held in Abbott Hall last week, Friday evening, by the pupils of Cameron School. The teachers held a reception immediately afterwards and were congratulated by the parents and teachers and by the parents and friends of the pupils. Following their usual custom, the children marched from Cameron School to West Lawn Cemetery in the afternoon and decorated the soldiers' graves with flags and flowers. Brief services were held and singing of, quote, "sleep, peaceful sleep," end quote, by the children concluded the exercises. The next couple paragraphs are called Fire. All Westford was startled on Thursday noon by hearing that the Honorable Herbert E. Fletcher's home on Oak Hill had burned. Words of sympathy were heard everywhere over the misfortune. This was one of the most beautiful and modern homes in the town. Situated on the outskirts of the town on the Groton Road, close by Senator Fletcher's extensive granite quarry, it was some time before the fire department could get there. Dr. Wells hurried over in his new automobile carrying some men. The automobile fire department from Lowell was summoned, and the men on the quarry worked hard, but it was impossible to save the house. All the family were away but Mrs. Fletcher. She directed the work of saving the furniture and clothing in the house, and Fred A. Snow, in charge of the office, saved the office building and all the valuable papers there. It is thought the fire caught from an open fireplace. And that's the news in Westford for the week ending June 4th, 1910. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Ryan Cousins of WestfordCAT for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from a century ago. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.